can say what you're gonna do.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to take a look at something that Tyler and I and more recently Lynn have been working on to try to move along the integration process that we've been discussing. So I will, and then after that, we're going to go back and talk some more follow up on the discussion regarding the alphakit concept that Tyler brought up last time. All right. Now, why do I have so many different? I hope I've got the right one here. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's a problem with
Now, why do I not have control over my own screen?
Oh, you're showing more secret stuff there, George. You better get that off. It's
well, it's no,
I'm just joking. I'm joking.
But I can't understand why I do not have control of my own screen.
There's something about when you have multiple documents, and I've run into this problem with courses too. You got to go back and click on something else.
I see you put constructor theory in there. That's interesting.
Okay, now we go. All right, so basically, I put together this table.
No, we don't see it yet. We still don't see it.
We see a typed thing.
It's still the list.
Oh, it says my screen sharing is paused. And how do I?
Yeah, Lynn, I don't know Chiara Marletto. I don't know.
Actually, I do. She's what's his name? She's a physicist, and it's the quantum physicist. What's his name? The famous one at Oxford.
Paul Davies, you mean?
No. There's another one. Anyway, the two of them have come up with constructor theory, and it's interesting always to listen to the physicists because they put together new words for what's already out there, as if this is the answer to the future and the world.
Is that Bayesian?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's the guy that wrote that book on time and yeah, I know who you mean. I know.
Who are you talking about? What? Who did you just say?
Bayesian.
No.
He's got something called a constructor law.
No, this is oh God, my brain. I'm sorry. It's
No, I'm not coming up with it either, Lynn. I picture him even too. He's written a couple books.
I'm gonna look it up for just
the Edge of Infinity or something like that. He's written some interesting books.
Oh, this guy's. I mean, it's. Oh, David Deutsch.
David Deutsch.
Yeah. Yeah. The two of them, and they've got this really flashy website on it, and I mean, they were really pushing it out there. And then it was when I tried to, it was pretty obscure what they were saying.
I agree.
When I tried to nail it down, and I'm tried to put it into some. Okay, you got it, George.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so basically, what I was considering is we could construct this table and put sort of the overall theory name in here, and then expand it as we need to. And we might have to go to a spreadsheet format in order to do that. But in any case, I broke it down into a couple of different major, I guess you'd call it themes. What is the process that's being implemented or is taking place? What results from the process? And then what are the consequences of those results? And then what theory and prediction do we make out of it? So Tyler and I have worked on this. I filled in my part of it, and Tyler filled in his part of it. We had originally, I sent this to Lynn Troncalli for him to fill in this column, and he just he never responded. He didn't say anything about it.
I
So
have
again-
one. Mhm. I have one for you. Didn't I send it to you, George? The one I
Uh,
did on him?
Yeah, yes, but we thought for right now we would leave this and then,
Focus on this first. Yeah.
yeah, just to get the basic idea, and then we can bring, if you want to talk about.
No, it's all right. It's good. I'm good. Just so
Right,
you had it.
right,
Mhm.
Lynn, because you said you would like to run.
Run it by Len.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we were respecting that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so I will send this to all of you when we're done. But basically, we tried to look at what are the parallels. That's what we're kind of talking about. What are the parallels? What, for example, are the results of the combogenesis in terms of the grand sequence? And then what are the consequences? A set of levels of things. We're pretty much well, I could actually edit this now that I see, Tyler, that you say set of levels of things. This is corresponding to what I've been calling levels of organization. So that might need a little work also. And then, so what theory do we derive from all of this? So basically, that's where.
George, I want to ask a question. Can you go up to process again? So I think I filled it in is 3, not that there were, I just took advantage that there were 3 slots, 3 rows. But was there a reason for the 3 rows of process? I don't think I asked you that ever.
Yeah, that's basically modeled on mine. So you
Right.
can within a column, you can combine or increase the number of rows.
Right. But I'm wondering, do the 3 mean something, or you just needed to get 3 points in, and I just took advantage of the 3 slots and put
Yes.
stuff in there?
Yes.
Okay,
So yeah, I was following my auto organization, the emergence and the selection phases of the process I'm calling ontogenesis.
And so just to be so I think if we spend a minute with this, so your auto or intentional or intentional, I guess intentional in the case of humans, seen as a phase transition in matter and energy, and I combine and integrate prior existing things. Those are pretty those are pretty similar. I mean, you don't say you're combining, but you are in your diagrams of ontogenesis.
Right.
The second one, emergence, a multiplicity of new entities with new affordances. I like the word relations. I'm happy with the word affordances, both actual and potential. I think we're right on the same line, literally, with that, with the row. And then the third one, since you had put selection by conditions of the environment, pairs out, and pairs out. Is that a word, George? P-A-R-E-S?
Well,
Is that parses?
no.
I think
Pairing as in diminishing, or you pair an apple, you so forth. I thought it was PARES.
Yes, yes, it is.
there is a thing called a paring knife, which does exactly that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can probably find a better term.
You could just say cuts out entities, but pair is not, pairs nice, pairs out entities that are not going to contribute to the next round of ontogenesis. Or that don't work on that level either. I mean, it's not necessarily whether they contribute or not, right? Some cells might go extinct before multicellularity. It didn't. Anyway, that's a fine point. But then I tried to put in the selection processes of energy repose in the physical realm, Darwinian selection in the biological realm, and a Darwinian like, meaning it's a propagation, variation, selection in the cultural realm. So I try to, just so everyone knows, I try to keep consistent with your rows in the process, even though those rows were not separated functionally, other than you felt the need to say 3 things there. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Okay. And then the next one, the results, new level of nested organization, greater complexity of entities. Sorry about my misspelled word, and my recognize is there. We'll have to change that. But so this is direct, that we're directly in the same head with this, except I just emphasize that I'm just not trying to do stars. I'm just trying to do a lineage of buildup. That's the only thing there. And then the next row, consequences, knowledge and information generation, quantitatively due to coevolutionary processes. I was unsure. I didn't ask you what exactly you meant by that, but I just put, I put in, it's kind of similar to the results in a way. I had a hard time, I guess, distinguishing results from consequences. So I just put something a little bit more general into my slot there, a set of levels or of things that possess the properties that each was built from levels in a prior, things in a prior level. And one can ask about the consequence, one can ask about commonalities then across the levels as a set of things with have the properties of being part of a grand sequence. So to me, that was a consequence. One could start searching for system processes within a grand sequence, or meta patterns within the grand sequence, which is where the alpha kit came out from once you have this set. And one of your consequences is that we get the universe as we perceive it. So
I was addressing the idea that knowledge is increasing in the sense that new organizations with new structures are more complex. And from my chapter 2 ontology, that was the notion that as complexity increases in individuated structures, that we can reflect on that as being an increase in knowledge. And any increase in knowledge will result in the generation of more information.
Oh, okay. You're using knowledge in a non-traditional sense. Okay.
Yeah,
I really like it. George, that's one of my favorite things that one chart or those two charts, the graphics that you put together about knowledge and information and matter or material and energy. I think it's like profound, actually. And to have that written up in this chart, I mean, I don't know how to write it up to have it in there as more than just, knowledge and information generation. There's, maybe there's some short way to put it together to get the full picture. I don't know.
Maybe there's a way of putting little illustrations as thumbnails in the boxes if there's something that illustrates it in words. I mean, like the picture or the chart you're talking about, maybe it can fit in a very small under there, so we can picture what you're referring to.
Do you know if you click on a thumbnail embedded in a Word document, does it expand? Because it would be impossible to tell what the diagram says as a thumbnail. I couldn't imagine it being compressed to that.
Well, all these different things all have graphics, so maybe just graphics as
but thumbnail, if it's in a
pages would be helpful.
If thumbnail is in a good definition, you can just increase the size of the Word document to have a better look. But then you can recognize the image from. You can infer it when you look at George's work or Tyler's work. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
just
this
an
is a
idea
basic.
that popped up.
This is a basic beginning of an attempt to try to see what the commonalities and differences are across these different categories. And there may be other categories that we want to add. We may want to think of these things differently than what I was thinking of, in terms of the word's consequences and so forth. But this is just a beginning place. And then the question is, if we see enough value in pursuing this approach, then we can maybe start talking about things like embedding thumbnails and
Mhm.
so on and so forth, if that's okay. What I was hoping was to broaden this thing, to expand it. So others, the idea was I have got a whole, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see that while I'm sharing my screen, but I showed it to Tyler. And I'm going to show you in just a minute where that,
Yeah. So
that leads.
in terms of the processes, what occurs to me, George, you've got information, knowledge, energy, and mass. Are there not therefore four processes that are at work? The creation of new information, the creation of knowledge, the creation of energy, the creation of mass.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that.
So you've got in the diagram that Lynn and you were just referring to in terms of information, knowledge, energy, and mass.
Yeah. Okay.
If those are, let's say, stages, are there not therefore four processes at work, or the processes that convert from one to the other?
What that's attempting to show is that there are fundamental substances, a priori substances. And remember, it's an ontology, so therefore it's making they're sort of like premises. They're ontological commitments to a starting place. And and then I'm just simply showing the relations that exist between the four different substances, and not really trying to get into the processes of those, for example, matter to energy and energy to matter, or information embodied in structure, material structure, being the equivalent of what we call knowledge. So it's not, not really, let's see, I kind of got lost here. Gary, you were wondering what the processes were of.
So
I think, George, if I can interpret Gary, you can tell me this is right, that if George, if you have four sort of properties, knowledge, information, matter, and energy, what I heard Gary asking is, wouldn't there be a process for each? Is that right, Gary?
Yes, the process of I don't know, enactment, transformation, creation, the creation of information, the creation of knowledge, the creation of energy, the creation of mass. Yeah.
Yes, but that's what the rest of the chapter describes. Well, I don't go into the matter energy transformations because Einstein did a pretty good job of that already. And we know it works because we've got atomic and hydrogen bombs. But
George, wouldn't matter? I guess it depends what is meant by matter. If matter, and I'm not sure what Gary was referring to here, but if matter just refers to just mass, that's one thing. But if matter refers to the organization of matter, but that's what you're not, right, Gary? Is that what you're asking? Is matter itself could change during these levels?
what levels are we talking about?
At every level. So what I'm talking about is, at the moment you've got three processes. You've got processes of combination, of integration. Yeah. You've got Are these really processes?
Yes, well, where I describe auto organization, that's a process. The emergence of the new entities and their capacity to interact with other entities, both new and old, is a process. And then selection. Actually, the process is talking about the whole thing, the whole cycle, the ontogenic cycle.
Mm.
So auto-organization leading to emergence, and then acted upon by selection, leading to stable forms that can participate in the next go-around of that cycle.
Oh, so, but what if, maybe this would clarify things, like in the first entry there, George, auto-intentional organization, seen as a phase transition is in matter, comma, energy, comma, information, and knowledge. Like, should all four be there if they're going to be used later?
Well, that's a reasonable point. Yeah, okay. Gary, is that what you're sort of getting at?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So in Len's waveform, he's got processes of sustainment, diversification, affordances for new relationships, and a process of integration. So he has four essential steps or phases in his waveform, which repeats, as you know, over and over again. So Len has four, yeah.
Right, and I think where the possible difference is that in my description of auto-organization, I also give mechanisms for diversification. And so that would, if I explain that as a fourth thing, between here and here, then that might better correspond to Len's diagram. But I include that in the auto-organization description later in the chapter.
Okay, so when you're talking about self-organization or auto-organization, then you're talking about a certain set of processes in itself that aren't spelled out right here.
No, yeah, I'm just, these are just the names of the things that are part of the process.
Main ideas, yeah, the main processes, yeah. I was listening to the whole thing, then I was going to go back because I have a list. I'm sitting here with my pen and my paper, a list of already questions about certain words and terms too. Do you want to go through the whole thing and come back to it, or do you want to?
Did you want to look at the consequences, George? We didn't take a look at that possible part of the chart that would be. Oh, not the consequences, the predictions part of, sorry, the theory and predictions.
Right. Okay, so I've talked about this before with this group, but I really see things, these transitions from lower levels to higher levels as in the terminology of phase transitions. And so I'm just introducing the idea that they're not, well, I'm not introducing it here. I'm just saying that this is what is introduced in my approach to things.
Well, what's in common there, is the hope that these kind of work can lead to some insights into the path that the world is taking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you and I have really been talking about so far is post-diction. We're describing what actually happened, but we're describing it by virtue of a process that leads to those things. It has the natural consequences. And that what we really would like to do is look into the future and in a traditional scientific way, if you've got a theory, you should be able to predict sort of what's coming next.
Yeah, and this is where, like, for example, Hillary comes in with his the future of Scotland. Hillary.
I got your book, Hillary.
Do you like it?
Well, I haven't been able to read it because my husband scarfed it up and he's reading it.
Oh, good. Yeah, we've had some wonderful reviews actually. There's an amazing review somebody just put up on Amazon, Amazon.uk. I guess you can see it as well. And while I'm afraid I'm multitasking, I'm also tweaking up our website slightly. But the guy said, wait a minute, I need to update that, and then I need to view page. Oh God! And he said, what did he say? The author, I enjoyed this book immensely. Lots of hard facts, but presented in a very readable way, allowing the layman and women among us to understand the author's vision, and visionaries they are. And then he says the book was very well paced and had the reader mesmerised at times. So clearly, some very deep-seated, well-informed thinking went behind it. So I'll take that one.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah, we've managed to connect in with some of the sort of behind-the-scenes influencers in the upper echelons of the Scottish financial and business and political community. So we're hoping that it might actually have some effect. But yeah, it's very interesting seeing how a complex socio-technical system behaves and how actors within it, how some of them think they have influence and others think they don't and that they do. And one won't know until we see a few phase transitions in the coming year.
Yeah, great.
So yeah.
So I think the theory and prediction row is good in terms of its aim, that it's
Yeah. And of course, in complex systems, you can't predict. You can't predict deterministically. You can identify possible futures and
Right.
attempt to estimate the relative probability of them and the consequence and the way that events might drive you into one attractor basin rather than another one. I don't think we know how to do. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. There's no way a priori of knowing, and really probably prediction is not the right term, although that's the classical term.
Maybe it's
or
anticipation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Certainly, anticipation is the. I've forgotten the guy's name, but there's somebody very into anticipation. And the other thing that
Rosen, maybe.
Yeah.
Rosen, anticipatory.
Rosen.
Of course, him. Yeah, there's a professor of anticipation in an Italian university as well. And the other thing I was going to say was that weather forecasters actually use forecasting rather than prediction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
They're very much in this trying to predict, trying to forecast the short-term behavior of a very complex system. They probably have some chance of knowing how it evolves in the short term, but of course climate modeling is completely different because you've just all the weather is just noise and you've got to look at something different beyond that.
Great.
Can I make a comment on alphakits in the context of all this? A few thoughts.
Sure.
That, well, when I reread Tyler's chapter, I was, really like, but the alphakit has a really important role in the process, and is in a way the newer alphakits are some form of materialization of the consequence, or that relaunches another layer or another tier of the process. And I'd very much like to see how this ties into all this, especially, well, I don't know if we plan to talk about alphakits more.
Yes.
But
yes.
I was about the whole affordance thing. I keep coming back to the affordance thing, like is an alphakit a system of affordance, and how does the process of reaching a whole new set of affordances actually work or tie with all this, because this is what evolutionary dynamics is all about in a way. I mean, yeah, it's the thoughts that I wrote rereading the direction that I went, rereading the alphakit and rethinking of what we said last month, and seeing this table.
I have a question about affordances itself. What is it? What is affordance or affordances? What is that, George? What do you mean?
Well, the idea there is that there are actually two senses of affordance that have been sort of put out there. But one is that you look at an object and it presents a particular configuration that, let's say, as an active conscious decision, you can see how you can use that or interact with that. And I'm using it a little more broadly to say that, for example, the valence shells of an atom provide affordances for other atoms who have their own affordances to interact with one another and form various kinds of bonds. What I used to speak in terms of is trying to generalize the concept of personality, that every object or entity has a particular personality that's outward facing, and that allows for other entities to form interactions with that. So it's basically, I mean, the paradigm is this idea of valence shells that allow atoms to interact. But it's also things like the shape of molecules that present different levels of electric force, pointing outward. Like in enzymes, for example, the shape is very important. Both the geometry and the affordances for interacting, in the case of an enzyme, with its substrate. Does that kind of clarify that?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I wrote it down as you were talking. That's why I wasn't looking at you while you were talking. Okay.
The original meaning or the original context I encountered it in, which is exactly equivalent to what George said, is a guy called Norman who wrote a book on the design of everyday things. And he talked about affordances, and he described them, I think, as a potential for interaction. And the examples he uses are in the everyday product domain, like if you've got a door that you come up to and you want somebody to push to open, you put a flat plate. And if you want them to pull to open, you have a handle. And if you want them to turn a knob to open it, you make it look as if it's designed to be turned. And so that was the original human level thing, but it applies everywhere. It's a potential for interaction, and it's kind of an encouragement. Well, certainly in the design sense, you use it as an encouragement for interaction.
And that's where it connects with, if you expand it to a potential for action, not only even before the interaction, yeah. That's where it becomes connected with the semiotic aspects of things. because, and this is why I'm insisting on the alphakit thing, because I think it connects the information and communication and triggers for action. I mean, communication as trigger for action type of thing, which actually can drive evolutionary dynamics and kind of, yeah.
Right. Well, why don't we finish up with this? You know, if we have any more comments about the way it is, I'll send this out and you know, you can think about it a little while and then offer comments back on what you think, how useful this might be, and so forth. Okay, go ahead, Len. I'm sorry.
I have another question for Tyler. Energy repose. What exactly do you mean by energy repose?
Right. So with the progression from the things of the standard model to protons and neutrons to atomic nuclei to atoms, there's the combining of things at those steps of combogenesis all result in lower amount of potential energy than existed before by the bonds that occur. So for example, when protons and neutrons are in nuclei, they are there because they're stabilized by being in an energy well, by being in a low energy state, which is lower than if the protons and neutrons had been separate from each other. The same with electrons around nuclei to form an atom. So when the nuclei that are formed in supernovas are ejected, well, are formed and were formed in prior nuclear fusion within the supernova, when those are ejected, when they cool off enough during the ejection process, which is sort of at the edge of a star, electrons that had been in a plasma around them now get bonded to the nuclei as an atom, and that's happening because there's a reduction in potential energy in that bond.
Right.
Technically, there's even a slight reduction in mass too. It can be a bit tricky with the heavier nuclei, which I might mess something up here with the curve of binding energy above, when it's above iron. And also the other caveat I want to make there is that some of the molecules can actually take energy to make the molecule. Like most of the molecules inside cells, it takes energy to make them. So this gets into this issue of lower entropy things can be formed as long as higher entropy got created, let's say in a chemical reaction. As long as there was net energy repose that happened, you can have microsites of sort of more energy, more bonded energy. So there are some complexifications in there, but in general, the formation of things of the standard model to nucleons, which are protons and neutrons, to nuclei, the first nuclei, to the first atoms, to the first molecules, are all energy repose in those structures.
Another term that's used is at equilibrium and far from equilibrium. How do you feel about those terms?
Yeah, yeah, but then there can also be the term near out of equilibrium. It doesn't have to necessarily be wait, did you say at equilibrium versus far from equilibrium?
Yes.
But I think the thermodynamicists also talk about just this side, just in the neighborhood of equilibrium. It doesn't have to be a binary like that. It's kind of a gradient. Although you could take the equilibrium mark as some kind of starting point, I think, Tom.
But whatever you call it, it's clear there's a big difference there. It's very
Yeah.
fundamental.
Yeah. Well, like a living cell is far from equilibrium because you could burn it with the oxygen in the atmosphere.
Yeah, the problem is with the word far. I've read several commentaries on that different people mean different things by far. And if you get too far from equilibrium, you're in a chaotic situation. Whereas living systems are characterized as, well, we've talked about dissipative systems, but they're not terribly far from equilibrium. It's just that they're maintained at that distance from equilibrium by the flow of energy. Does that make sense? I agree with Tyler. It's not a binary.
And Lynn, just to emphasize, so this energy repose was a general term that I came up with, even though in each instance of those physical chemical steps, the details of the bonding differ. So in the case of protons and neutrons forming nuclei, it's the residual of the strong nuclear force. In the case of nuclei and electrons forming atoms, it's the electromagnetic force. But they all do have that characteristic of lower total energy, and so they're settling into those more structured states.
So energy repose is your term.
Yeah, people sometimes talk about like minimization. I'm gonna make a mistake here, but I'm just gonna make up something.
But I know.
Like minimization of the Hamiltonian or something like that.
Right.
I mean, there are technical terms.
Yeah.
For this.
Yeah, I could do a little thing on that. I think there's when I'll tell you, Len did hit on something with dissonance. And that's, I'm not, things are called this here and here and here and here. And that's what, when you get in the word realm of words, that's where I'm doing so much comparing of things in this writing that I'm doing that I have to shake it constantly down.
Yeah.
I have another question, and thanks though, Tyler. I have it. I get it. It's interesting you guys didn't write hierarchy once, as you said new levels, you say sequences and levels of increasing nestedness, and hierarchy is nested hierarchy is a pretty common term. There's also the word, it's interesting to me. I've been reading a lot of Peter Corning in the last week, right? And a couple of weeks. And so it'll be really fun to put his stuff right next to this and the words used, because he's got a different view. And the view is selection, the word selection. I'm going to paraphrase, and this isn't quite accurate, but instead of saying selection, he's saying this more like and this is not what he says, but it's the idea of a successful synergy within an environment that changes the environment. It goes both ways. The environment just doesn't select. There's not a selection process. It's more like a successful process in the environment that can also change the environment itself. So there are all these different directions that it goes. He doesn't like the word selection.
Oh.
And
Yeah, that's a good
natural
point.
selection is it's not, that's not how it works. That these things find their way. They find these combinations find their way, and they may work, they may not, but they find their way, and then the environment changes as a result, and they change as a result of the environment. I mean, there's just this whole mix happening.
Yeah.
That's way more interesting. Natural selection is a competitive term. It implies it's as if it's a thing out there selecting.
Right.
And that's
Yeah,
not
I
what-
didn't mean, I think my meaning of the word selection here is more in line with what you're describing as
I think so too.
Corning's, because in the diagrams and in the descriptions that I give of what's going on during auto-organization is that things are changing in the environment as well as in the entities that succeed.
I think so too. That's why when I see natural selection and I read, because Corning's coming out of good old fashioned biological evolution,
Mhm.
he's going, no, this natural selection thing. And then so the word selection implies a number of things. Instead focusing on the entity that's coming in, it would be success by conditions in the environment. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that.
That would be interesting, Lynn, to try to put him into this because it would show some nuances or maybe put some different directions on language that
I'm going to be able to do that in the next few, and we'll see the 23rd. And then I don't know how much he'd be willing to join this group or at least show up once or twice, but I'm getting to the point where I'll be able to write that other list that, him as one of the others, his thing, and run it by him.
Yeah.
Does he do anything with extending his synergy principle prior to biology into the physical chemical?
He actually does. He does. I can send a chart of what he would call synergies.
Okay.
I can look for it right now. And he doesn't go greatly into it. He mostly focuses on what he knows. He's a Stanford biology guy. But he definitely thinks synergies are he's all about synergy, but he definitely sees it, synergies among particles. He describes it. He describes the synergy of elemental particles, how they work together to form wave, there's different, so he describes it at all these different levels.
All right.
Just very briefly, not as in depth.
Okay.
As the biology, yeah, definitely. But he tends to focus on biology. That's his.
Lynn, do you have any other questions? Because I'd like to finish out and we'll get on to alphakit discussion as soon as possible.
There's also there's the other thing that the synergy paper brought up is teleonomy, direction,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. It's here, it's obvious. It's but he makes it a process, you know what I mean, of direction and purposefulness. There's a purposefulness of synergistic for synergistic anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm done.
Okay. So just to kind of finish up this part of the discussion, I constructed this list out of that stack of books and some papers and other things. This is a partial list of people who are thinking along what I consider to be exactly the same lines, even though they use different language and they have slightly different ways of characterizing things. But at least in my mind, we're on the same page. So this is the list of folks who are working from the physical all the way up to the cultural evolution, following not following the grand sequence, but in line with the grand sequence. And then these are the ones who have the same basic concept of how new systems come into existence and further evolve from the origin of life onward. Tyler, you had mentioned something about why didn't I include Morowitz in this list? These are, as far as I know, these are all living people. I did get, he's listed here with Eric Smith, but what I'm beginning to sort of think is that this looks like a critical mass coming together in intent, if not, detail. And are we getting close to a time when we begin to invite people to participate in some way? My thought was we could have a mini conference and invite some of these folks to give their perspective on this. We'd have to frame it in terms of here, we all seem to be saying very similar things. What do you think is the most important aspect of your approach, something along those lines, and then follow that up with possibly an edited collection, inviting them to write chapters for a book, which I would get published in the IFSR book series. So anyway, I didn't include in the original list, I had myself and Tyler in here as well, but since we're already talking about that from these two columns, I took those out. So if any of you are familiar with any of these authors and or there's Len and their work, you might lend thought to how can we proceed to engage them. So that was basically it. Tyler, do you have anything else to?
Nope, good with that, George.
Okay. With that, I will stop sharing. And like I said, I'll email this to you all after we're done here.
Right.
I just read through Haken's Synergetics, which is an old book that I've had on my bookshelf. And that was really insightful too. I'll be adding some notes on that and questions. He did a really good job and back in the, when was it? It's an old book, but he was talking about the entire spectrum too. And he went into cultural from the physical through the cultural.
Mm-hmm.
And quite a beautiful job, but he didn't. So I'll look at the main points he made and pull those up.
Great,
Well,
Lynn.
Yeah, this is definitely in the air. There's definitely a trend going on here. And I think to gain any momentum, especially since we were fighting, holdover versions of biological evolution, which say, no, it's all accident. There's no direction to evolution. So another thought that did occur to me is that instead of me trying to contact or Tyler and me trying to contact, it might be best if, for example, Lynn and maybe Gary, or Helene or Hillary or Tom, but as organizers, trying to, because you don't have a horse in the race per se, whereas I and Tyler obviously are going to be biased in our own direction. So might give that some consideration.
Well, Peter Corning is giving his presentation on the 23rd. And that's an opportunity to engage him in, real conversation. He's publishing actively and well, and he's being cited now quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and, he's never had, and he's been, I think, frustrated over the years a bit, you know what I mean? He's kind of cantankerous and he's in his 80s. So
I think we know what he means because I've gotten very frustrated.
I know he has a long, However, I think he would really appreciate being included and studied, and he, very much appreciated that. I don't know how much he wants to be involved in a bunch of discussions with other people, but who
Yeah,
cares?
no, I'm thinking we're really on the brink of doing something substantive, not just discussions. For example, in this edited edition, we could get the chapters fleshed out in advance, send them to the other authors for comment. You know, and basically with the intent of trying to find similarities, convergences, and things of that nature. Not just say, oh, this theory is right and that theory is not right. Anyway, that's what's going through my head right now.
Yeah,
You could ask Peter as part of, to help put the group together, for some kind of conference. He's good at it. He's good at it.
I had also suggested to George that a few of these people might be candidates for the other Saturday meeting, for Peter's meeting, and we can kind of see who might be simpatico to form.
Maybe we can invite them to present.
Yes, well, that's the idea. I was starting to do that with John Stewart, and I will follow up on that now that we've started up again.
Yeah, well, that might be a good in. Yeah, if we invite them, to present
right
for 20 minutes, and then then have a roundtable discussion. And then as a follow up to that roundtable, we can then say, we're thinking about doing this. Would you be interested? Please could you contribute?
We'll have to see how it goes with Peter, because the roundtable could drive him away. It can get pretty, Yeah,
Lynn, I've shared this with Tyler, but my experience with Peter at oh, did I tell you?
Yeah,
it was a little testy. And he's got some heroes that I am not convinced are that much heroes, like Prigogine, for example. Not to discount Prigogine's work, but there were other thinkers who probably deserved the Nobel more than Prigogine did. But anyway, I don't want to belabor that point.
But let's see, because the one thing about Peter, I mean, Linda, I know he's working on a book, like trying to apply some of these to what's happening in the world now. People are
he
getting
does that. He did that already. He's done that. And he's doing that.
A previous book, and he's doing it again. Yeah. And I know
he launched a project at ISSS 2 years ago.
You can watch his plenary talk for ISSS from last year, and that's what it was about. He's always been about that.
Okay.
He to give you context, this is a man who was, is professor emeritus at Stanford in biology, and retired, and he and his wife spent 15 years in Washington farming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And George and he disagreed about farming practices, but doing organic farming, and they built an entire marketing thing in their community where they were selling boxes of produce, because he started putting he wanted to put his kind of his mouth where his work with his mouth was, actions with his, and I got to sit there. I was sitting with Len we caught a dinner outside at one of those outside places at Corvallis, and we were sitting there, and he and his wife were walking by, so they sat down, and we ended up having dinner for about 2 hours. And those two, Len and Peter, have been arguing for years, but they're friends. And they knew all these guys and all this stuff.
Oh, cool.
So I got to see them in that kind of realm, but he's a testy guy and doesn't have a lot of time for nonsense. He just doesn't want to waste his time. He's writing.
Sure.
Yeah. So to attract him for ISSS for January is a big deal. He didn't want to write up a PowerPoint or do any kind of introduction. He wanted everybody to write in advance. And when I heard that from Peter, I said, nobody's going to, some people will read in advance. Tyler did already. I would read in advance, but most people who show up won't. So I offered to do
Was
a
that the
quick
paper
out-
you sent us?
Yeah, I'm gonna do
Okay.
a quick PowerPoint.
Yeah, I
to-
read it.
Yeah,
Actually, and I didn't read the new one. I read the link you did to the one that was in Complexity in 2002 that's been cited 800 times. That's not
Yeah.
the same paper, is it?
I don't know. I have to
Right,
look
but
again.
I think-
I've
I
read
think
so
the-
much of his stuff, I can't remember which he sent me the thing now, but I'll get it. I'll get
Right,
it.
they overlap, and he does. I think the one he wants for that meeting to be discussed is a 2020 paper. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
it's very reasonable. Like philosophy departments do that all the time. Like they don't expect the people don't want to lecture. They want the people to have read the stuff beforehand, and we're having a conversation. So
Right, but we're not students. We're not being graded. We just show up.
Yeah.
And it's different in the public. So you have to,
Yeah, but it is frustrating that
Yeah.
a lot of members of ISSS don't take the time to study the
Right.
works that are already out there and then end up, going off sort of half-cocked and
Mhm.
inventing their own things.
well, it's called ISSS, and I mean, it's system sciences, and two of them just don't even have a clue. Too many just don't even have a clue of what that is.
Mhm.
Hence
So
my book.
let's move on then, because
Yeah.
we'll work. We look forward to Peter Corning on the 23rd, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tyler and I have already had a little talk about the Alpha Kit. I went back and reread the chapter, and there were a couple of things. My first reading, I just didn't have any problems with any of what he says in that chapter. But on second reading, I started to kind of, dig into it a little bit more. And a couple of things came up in my mind. I started with the icon itself for the cornucopia set. And, sort of things like, and this has, Helene, you probably have a lot to say about this. The idea that it's a fan out like this with kind of holes in it and so forth. I really wanted Tyler to explain. Yeah, there we go. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have. No, I did stop. Sure. To explain, what he had in mind with this particular icon. And I posed some questions in terms of, does it represent time progressing? And are the holes the impossible possible combinations of the element set? Do you want to start there, Tyler?
Well, yeah, I struggled with this, and I agree it needs to be improved. But the idea being the minimum alpha kit you could possibly had was a binary. So I wanted to simplify an element set as basic as possible. And the cornucopia, it was supposed to represent patterns being made from black and white. So they weren't holes. They were supposed to be patterns, complex patterns being created from complex protein patterns being created from 20 amino acids, complex vocabulary being created from 45 phonemes approximately in English. So without showing, I didn't know whether I should show like 10 boxes of black and white patterns, but the idea is that it's huge in number. It's not supposed to be 10. So it was supposed to, George, it was the best I could do, kind of impressionistic.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I didn't see a explanation that.
Yeah, but that's a really good point. I did not explain the diagram. And so that's a really good point that I can 100% take. And for example, you thought time, and it's not supposed to represent time, but time is important in the cornucopia sets because they do tend to expand over time. They don't necessarily have to, but the number of molecules, the number of types of molecules has expanded. The number of types of proteins, which are a type of molecule, has expanded, and the number of words have expanded. Even though, well, you know, we probably don't, none of us probably use as many words as Shakespeare used. So it doesn't have to, which people have counted how many words Shakespeare used too. It doesn't have to expand, but it can expand. And you brought up the fact of like drug names, that if there's a need in human language to expand the words, we have the tools through phonemes to do that. So it's okay. I'll leave it at that. It didn't meant to represent time, but time is an interesting aspect to bring in a more detailed discussion. Thank you.
Right. The whole, what I interpret as the holes in this expanding cornucopia set led me to wonder, and again looking at the chapter, that within the process of elements in the element set being combined, it seemed to me, taking for example grammar, there's a set of constraints on what amount to legal combinations. And so that was an issue that we brought up again.
Yeah, and I actually prepared a slide to make just a couple remarks about that, the grammar aspect and the constraint on the actual cornucopia set field.
Take it away.
Take it away. And I also want us to get to Helen's question about is there something my interpretation, something special about the affordances that an organizational level has when an alphakit structure gets created. And Helene, when we get to that, I'll turn to you to ask that question again, if that's okay. All right. So so I can, let's see if I can move on. Oh, do I need to maybe show, are you all seeing the little thing on the left? Do you all see enough right here? Is that?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wish I didn't have to. So just a quick review of some things. So the reason atoms are so abundant in are the element set is because of their electron shells, which are shown here. And this gives us the periodic table of about 92 active elements. They call them the elements. And the grammar here is atomic bond, is the grammar of the rules of atomic bonding. What's allowed, certain combinations are allowed and more favorably energetic and more likely to occur due to the various kinds of atomic bonds. And Tom has dealt with this in some of his diagrams, Tom, of different kinds of bonding that exist here. And it's not just a couple of different types, co-bonding or ionic. There's mixed and there's degrees of bonding. But what you get are these things called molecules. A is hydrogen, B is water, not carbon dioxide, C is a chlorophyll molecule, and D is a rubisco, which some people call the most abundant protein on Earth because it's in every green plant. And the molecules can vary in these sizes. And the important thing here is that they are in the inside archaea, which is a prokaryote in this case, and I guess I have some bacteria here, is the next alphakit structure, amino acids going to proteins. And this shows the 20 amino acids, just a little review for people. And they've all, the parts in color, the greens and the purples, the browns and the blues are these side chain groups that are the different parts of the amino acids. And the top parts on the left are these amine sides and these carboxyl sides, and they link up in chains and trains, like boxcars and trains, due to peptide bonding. So the grammar there is a specific kind of bonding, a peptide bond, but it's not random molecules colliding and bonding, this is being guided inside cells. And I think this is very important because these amino acids are being shuttled to the ribosomes one by transfer RNA and linked up to be part of the tens of thousands of types of protein molecules inside cells. So that was a bit of review of the atom to molecule alpha kit, the amino acid to protein alpha kit, and the phoneme to word alpha kit. I don't need to review because we all use that. Now to talk about George's.
Tyler,
Yes.
can I ask a question about this? So can any two amino acids form a peptide bond? Are there any constraints due to the side chains?
George, that's a good question. I think the answer is yes, but I cannot confirm that. I'm not enough of a.
Well, I can check it out myself.
But I'm pretty sure it's possible. And then what happens? These side chains start bonding with each other in weaker bonds as this long chain of maybe 100 or more amino acids starts folding up to form the protein. So that Rubisco molecule that's down here in D, and it's not to, the atoms are not to size, it's not the same size, but the little grays there are the hydrogen, which are shown in molecule A there in hydrogen H2. What all molecules have in common is that they're made of atoms, and they're all, they got complex electrical fields around them. This Rubisco has sites in which carbon dioxide and some other small molecule can come in, and the carbon dioxide gets bonded, and so it's the way to bring carbon dioxide. This is an enzyme, and this only exists inside plants and algae, and it's made by plants and algae. So the grammar of this is the grammar of the formation of this in being formed from amino acids is bonding. But the tricky part is that it's bonds that are being manipulated, they're in the context of the living cell that is putting this molecule together. And this molecule varies in an oak tree or a maple tree. It's still Rubisco, but then you get genetic differences in this molecule, and they can do trace trees.
Would you say that that's not too dissimilar from the idea that any two phonemes, or any three or whatever combination of phonemes, is possible, but within the context of a language, we don't know?
Totally analogous, and I would say that's a strong analogy. It's not just a pie in the sky analogy, George. I would say that's really true.
Okay, good.
Could I offer a definition or of grammar as being, or a, let's say, abstract description of a grammar being a habit of combinatory, or a habit of formation that, like, created from a prevalence of interaction, or a prevalence of combinations that becomes inscribed into some form of a rule, or prevalence, if you're not saying that it's a strict
And
rule.
how are you using the word habit, Helen? Because that would be a little bit more expanded, but I'm fine with what you said, depending on.
Well, habit being the frequency aspect of the reproduction of a pattern, for example. The term habit turns up quite a lot in pattern literature as being the, how can I put that? As being the characteristic of some systems that take a habit, in the sense that they often produce, or they often display some form of something being a habit, or the way our brain gets formed or shaped, like shape can be formed by habit, in the sense that there's something to do with reproducing a schema, or reproducing a pattern, and reproducing it more because it's like learning, basically connected with some form of learning. I mean, I'm thinking as I'm talking. I haven't thought it through yet, but
definitely since the alpha kit of the amino acid to protein gets guided by a living cell, and therefore over billions of years that got guided by evolution.
yeah, and the actual
George's point that the combination of phonemes are taking place in a human cultural, group, in which our brains are being trained to the linguistic patterns of our group. I do think the linguistic alpha kit being in a human group compared to the biological alpha kit being inside cells is exactly analogous. Maybe we'd have to say, what if we want to use the word something else rather than the word habit there. Well, let me show you the one slide the specific slide I made for today, because I knew George was going to bring up the thing about grammar and constraints. And
yeah, but how does grammar form then? It's like there's a process of formation of a grammar. The grammar being a form of a pattern of rules of assemblage, or of rules for assembly.
Right. So generally,
taken from cultural habits, but I'm saying maybe not only cultural habits. Helen, not only.
I did not just write this slide. That's pretty strange. I wrote this up this morning. Taken from cultural
okay,
habits.
So the habit was in the air, right?
That's really strange.
Oh. Seems to me there's a circular relationship here, maybe recursion. When we talk about a system having some stability, it endures because it's stable within its environment. But isn't the system and its environment normally a broader system? So it endures because the environment provided by the broader system endures. And of course, it endures because the next broader system endures. So hemoglobin, for example, is one of the proteins, and it's only around because animals are around, and it transports oxygen within animals. So it seems like this is another thing that makes systems, especially higher level systems, more complex. And perhaps the focus, a system itself is very important, of course, but maybe the real focus is on the whole hierarchy of systems. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, in terms of relevance to the alpha kit structure, a set of phonemes are fairly stable within a linguistic system in which the words can change, but the words are changing pretty slowly. However, each of us as individuals can make up new sentences that have never been said before. I mean, yes, Tommy, there is something about then stability of the human being in a social system, the stability of a cell being in a biosphere that has some stability. There is something about nested stability that I agree is important to think about and maybe define more clearly. I mean, to get towards Helen's question earlier, when George's slides were up, I cut just a couple of points. One is that all these things have some intermediate levels between the elements in the cornucopia, but they're less important, and they're not unimportant. But there's something about the element cornucopia dynamics, because the cornucopia is the place that virtual, unlimited, infinite pattern can happen from the relatively small numbers of elements, given the grammars, and the grammars for the physical law alphakit are the rules of atomic bonding that happens mostly random collision in nebula and then on planets and things like that. And within cells, again, to repeat that this is happening inside cells, there's these amino acids are assembled at ribosomes through peptide bonds. And then in humans, it's not the same thing. We're just talking, and we don't have to think about how the phonemes are assembled. So I guess, Helen, I just put down the best I could do there was say it's taken from cultural habits, because we're not thinking, we just speak.
But you just said that things start with random collision, but then
well,
the movement that is generated, or the process that's generated by some random thing, becomes installed as a more regular something. And this is how evolution works. I mean, I don't have the words to say it, but
yes.
but intuitively, this is what many people describe in different words of what's happening, because this random thing that happens has probably some effect on a structure that increases the probability for something similar to happen later on, which I call the habit creation, which is not probably the right word. So back to what you were saying as the relationship between the elements and the cornucopia, is that the more elements can be combined, and the more elements are combined by accident, the more they become combined following rules that become more stable, and the more possibilities this gives. That brings us back to affordances that maybe take the system at another level and brings the system in a condition or in a situation where other things can be performed, and ultimately another cornucopia can take place. And this is the type of thing I'd like to
okay, so I do
connect to the combogenesis, because there is combination going on in the elements, not only in the structure of the things. I mean, to me, there's a parallel combination of stuff that's going on in what you describe in going from one level to another. And there's also some combinatorial going on in the alphakits. And to me, the alphakits are more important in the process than how they are described. It seems to me that they're not at their real, at their just role or function.
I agree with you. They're particularly important. They're not just they're not an ordinary kind of combination. They're particularly important because of this huge field, immediately huge field of possibilities that the alphakit structure gives. So once you have human language by, let's say, at least by the upper Paleolithic, some people would say definitely more, in its complex language, we can have thousands of years later the invention of agriculture, the inventions of various we can have all kinds of things with cultural evolution happening. I agree, there's something, it's not the ordinary, it's a combination. There's something because of the explosion of potential that this particular structure gives at the beginning of life and the beginning of culture.
But not necessarily only. I mean, in an ongoing.
It could be ongoing. If what's happening in the world now is with the planetary scale, if it's a new level of the ontogenic cycle or combogenesis of nations combining into something larger. If for example, what's a potential alpha kit, new alpha kit that's growing? It's, in my mind, it's computer language coming from zeros and ones expressed electronically that basically after Turing give us this huge potential for expressing programmable languages. If are we giving birth to an alpha kit that's external to the human body, which is now going to run on its own? I think that's one implication of this, one interpretation of thinking about what's going on today, given this kind of modeling language.
But there's something Helene said that triggered a thought. This business of how the members of the cornucopia set become more or less viable in an environment, as if the environment is a containing system. But there's something about ecosystems we need to get a better grip on, because an ecosystem is merely the emergent whole formed by all its members. There isn't a controlling system above other than the self-organization of all the interactions. So you can think of it of a hierarchy with environment as a containing system, but that doesn't really work, because you've got a more complex system to systems model about how it all fits together and aggregates. So I wanted to make that point without pushing it, just sort of park that thought. And the other thing was when Tyra mentioned Turing, this thing about the number of possible permutations. I'm reminded that in the Enigma codes, which of course is where Turing got his fame for helping to work out how to decrypt them, there was a defect in the Enigma coding logic, which was that you couldn't have the same coded group represent, or the same coded character representing the same plain text character twice running. And that sounds like, to the uninitiated, that sounds like a good way of making it more difficult for a manual code breaker to work out to decrypt it. But actually it drastically reduces the number of possible permutations and brought the problem of cracking the codes from outside to just within the computational capability of the time. So this thing about allowed combinations and permitted combinations, you don't need very many disallowed combinations to radically reduce the percentage of the possibility space that's actually populated by viable members of the cornucopia set. That was all I wanted to interject.
Might I grab the mic here? I want to go back to Helene's characterization and point out something that I've been studying, having to do with how those combinations come about in the first place. And Helene, you said random combinations, but in actuality, if you look at in detail at all of the combinations at all levels, there exist already a priori, in this case before the element set, an environment that actually has a dynamic that establishes a context. Then the actualized combinations that occur are not random, but they might be stochastic, but they're not random in the true sense of the word random. So let me give you an example. In the model, in the origin of life model, there's a flow of energy through the system, and the system is bounded in some way. And there's just lots of molecules floating around, so to speak, but that flow of energy actually sets up a convective cycle. And that convective cycle has an ability, or the result is there's a sorting of molecules by weight and a number of other electronic characteristics and so on. So it isn't just a random combination that occurs, but there's already imposed by the context of the evolving system.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. I misused the word random. I meant not necessarily already that had already occurred, or not necessarily instituted as a regular thing that can be predicted. I mean, of course, it's constrained by the structures around, and it is conditioned by what's going on around and the context. Yes, so it's random in the sense that the way I was intending it, it's random in the sense that it's not following a law. I mean, that it's not following a pre-existing rule.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not
It's something
deterministic.
that occurs for the first time as an accident in evolution,
Okay.
or in evolutionary dynamics. I don't know.
yeah. So what you're saying, if I can feed it back to you and have you say yes or no, is that in the element sets, we have what currently exists in the world, but there's possibilities for new combinations of the elements. Is that what you're saying? There's always possibilities for new combinations
Yes,
to be tried?
and possibilities maybe for adjunctions of new elements that come into the.
Definitely.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm talking and thinking as I'm,
No, and
reading and.
I agree with that. There's always, and I think this is very important to the role that these alpha kits play in the respective evolutionary dynamics of biology and culture.
Yeah.
No, I have a couple of thoughts after all this. First is there's always a, Len brought this up, a central kind of working area of combinations that work, and then there's others on the outside that are floating around kind of looking, to try to work, to try to combine. There's also another thing when George is talking, the flow of energy through the system, a bounded system with a conductive cycle inside, with the sorting of molecules, all within an environment. What we're talking about, one thing that Peter brings up with synergy is feedback, of constant feedback cycles between the entity and the environment. Does it work? Doesn't it work? You know what I mean? Is this it's a cybernetic process. It's a feedback process of out in the world, does it work? And then it goes. I don't know how to put that into place or how to say it, but it's the relationship of the thing interacting with the environment that allows it to keep going, to be successful. There's something there. That it's out there. I mean, I think of my 3-month-old grandson, putting everything together. Yeah, I know, he's so cute. And I'm ridiculous. Everything's my 3-month-old grandson. But as he's putting things together, some things work, some things don't work. And it's the feedback that's, as he's figuring out sounds, as he's figuring out that same process is going on with molecules, with elements, and molecules. That same process is going on all the time. We just happen to have more stable ones that we see.
It's the learning, right?
Yeah, it's the learning. And then that's where we get into, but it's learning in a broad sense. It's,
Right.
it's stabilizing sort of, you know, it's what are the interactions that work that allow me to stabilize myself in the world, whether I'm an atom working together, or, you know, whatever element I am, set I am.
Lynn,
Yeah.
and how do you interpret that with regard to what Helen was saying, that then it's what works, but because of this alphakit structure, there's new ways of getting things that work that didn't previously exist, but stay within the context of this expanding cornucopia, let's say, within the particular columns.
Yeah, because just I'll add a little thing. What I wrote down here is that I wrote down that you could see the alphakit as a system of affordance.
That's interesting.
That constitutes itself. So I don't know how it constitutes itself, but it doesn't come in one piece. So it's not there, and then it starts, and then it's integrated in a certain way from what I understand in what you describe. And then there's another one coming that brings another system of affordance. And that's why I always come back to the little boxes, the 4 quadrants that you were using in the first sessions that you had that I didn't attend. And I think it was Hillary who came up with this and the term of affordance. I don't know, I have the name of Hillary associated to that, saying that each box at each level provided some other form of affordance. And I remember then when we talked together, Tyler, back in April last year, I was saying, but there's something about the alphakit that's there, and that a new alphakit that comes at the new level that would be interesting to revisit in relation to these quadrants that were made, or to this reflection about combogenesis and how we go from one level to another in relation to systems of affordance and how they get constituted, because that's the key, like, crucial role or function I see of the alphakit.
To continue with that, I think is just to emphasize that when the biological alphakit, the middle column there, came in at the start of life, and we don't really understand at all how this happened. I mean, there's people, you know, really smart people working on it, and progress is being made. And George quoting the Morowitz book a lot, and you know, there's huge progress being made, but there's still a big way to go to understand the full genetic ribosome protein assembly thing that goes on in cells and how that came into being. But once it did come into being, the affordance in an evolutionary sense, that then you could get combogenesis to the eukaryotic cell and combination to multicellularity, and that same alphakit of 20 amino acids continued in those subsequent levels. It was not a new alphakit being made. The power of it was enough to have all of biological evolution take place. And then when humans came on the scene through biological evolution, and then cultural evolution emerging, in the story I like to tell of complex language with phonemes, that this is a new alphakit. This is a fundamentally new alphakit that was not the biological one. It took place on sound waves between people talking with each other, and then in people's minds with a universe of words that are in a sort of a cognitive metabolic system that's analogous to the protein metabolic system inside cells. But now we have this cognitive system of words that can form sentences and phrases and describe, model things, model the world, model human relationships, model our minds. That is so powerful that a new kind of evolutionary dynamics began. And then once you have that, boy, then all kinds of things can happen with this phoneme word system.
Slight complication. So my candidate for the new alphakit would be the neocortex and its organization, particularly cortical columns. And
What
the
are
reason,
what are the elements?
huh?
If new alphakit, what are the elements?
The cortical columns, because they have an ability. We're not born as tabula rasas, but the neocortex has an ability to encode almost any kind of combination of perceptions or percepts and concepts, some concepts of which are going to be the abstractions that we give to language. So the phonemes, I just wonder if the phonemes aren't the result of the evolution of, for example, Wernicke's area and the motor area for speech on the left side of the brain.
But so I don't deny, George, that the brain, something neurological had to allow this rich human alpha kit forming ability to take place, but I don't see that the cortical columns themselves are this kind of pattern. They are a pattern of things forming a complex system in the brain, but I don't know that they're this kind of pattern.
Yeah,
People
yeah, that may be, but what I'm trying to do is look at the possibility that there was an intermediate step, that the neocortex represents an alpha kit for individuals that enabled individuals to later communicate using phonemes and language and so forth.
Well, possibly. I last time I think Hillary was bringing up some other human alpha kits, and we were also talking about mathematics and the alphabetic written language as opposed to the Chinese written language, written language. And I was just this week, it struck me that the game of chess is a kind of an alpha kit structure. You've got, I forget how many different types of beings in a chess set. You get the pawns, and then not too many, right? Bishop.
Pawn, rook, bishop, knight, queen, king.
Yeah. So what? 6 or?
I think it's 6. Pawn, queen, king, bishop, knight, and rook.
Yeah. So that's pretty amazing. That and the game of Go is only 2.
Yeah.
And so it looked to, I think, a really interesting question is humans and music too.
Yeah. Oh yes, yes.
Is humans the ability of the, and George, you maybe want to take this on with the neuroscience that the ability for humans to create alpha kit type structures, which is specifically meaning a relatively few number of elements through the rules, however these rules through Helen's point that these rules themselves are only at a given time. The rules themselves are subject to change because they're the current, let's say with language, the current language that we use. It's hard. I mean, we can make up new words. Okay, let me just progress from that thought. That
change or perfect themselves within an existing. Within a system of constraint. I mean, not change from one.
Yeah, within
it only changes with a new system.
But that the universe of potential is so huge in these various alpha kit situations that's really key. There's always, use Stuart Kaufman's term, the adjacent possible. There's always expansion possible into the territory of the unactualized, which I used down below. And I realized I had the smaller than greater sign switch. The actualized is always smaller than the unactualized in these systems. So there's something about humans that may be in the brain, that it wasn't just language, but it may have been a general alphakit forming capability. I'll mention the name George because he brought up the brain. It just struck me this week, like chess and Go are basically manifestations of this human capability of forming, of doing alphakit structures.
Yeah, I would say it's the nature of the neocortex to have this kind of flexibility, both in terms of learning new things, but also of manipulating concepts, that actually is the base of all of these other alphakits. So it was human beings who created games like chess and Go and so forth through imagination and desire to accomplish something. Some intentional organization.
Another perspective to put into place is Seth Lloyd's information processing list. And when you see it as information processing, oh, you turned it off. I want to see that, Tyler.
Oh, you want to see it back on? Okay, I thought.
Yeah, go back there. I'm talking about yours.
Oh, okay, I thought we were getting.
Yeah, I know. I want to see that if you wouldn't mind. So when we're talking about, instead of words, because you did mention music and chess and all those other things, where we have a level of information processing. You could say that requires all the mammalian things, the sensory apparatus, all the stuff formed by all those proteins, including the cortical columns formed by those proteins. And then all of it works together to the new alphakit, the new cornucopia set of now, what are we talking about? Symbolic structures? Are we talking about symbolic structures?
Yeah.
It wouldn't necessarily be words, but it would be music, chess, games, and it would be even, he broke it down before words, before grammar. He said that was a big information processing step was words, but before that, what did he call it? He went reason was first. The ability to apply rules and definitions and procedures, knowledge to get results, know-how generates new information, ways to inform. And then he's talking about language, the capacity to generate new information with words. He separated those things. He said atoms and molecules, and then biological systems, and sexual reproduction, because it allows for more differentiation, generation of more information because of its two new combinations, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then reason he put next, which is interesting. The ability to apply rules and definitions, know-how, which is kind of interesting. And that's that leap from proteins to that words. You're right. Words isn't the word. It's just, it's more than words.
It's more than words, although there's something about since we think word is very deep in human evolution, we think words came in before the game of chess. There are some claiming that music may have come before complex language. So I'm not going to say words.
I don't know though, yeah.
There's that book, The Singing Neanderthal, and we're not going to know this. This
Yeah.
group is not going to have an opinion on it because the experts are debating it. But it looks like music's pretty deep because they find 40,000-year-old flutes made of bones, bird bones. But you know, I didn't explain. I don't know if it was obvious. The syllables, the C and the V and the C. Those are vowel consonants. These are like basic kinds of syllable forms. Where I've been looking this up. Consonant vowels, the most common. Then vowel consonant, consonant vowel consonant. Words can have multiple syllables. Can have multiple phonemes in them. But to address your question, Lynn, about Seth Lloyd, and yes, sexual combination does generate, it's a way of creating variability in the genetic codes that give rise to different protein families.
It's still all about proteins.
But it's still all about the 20 amino acids. So
right.
There's something fun, there's something about this. In fact, I was even, since I told you I was unhappy with these wording, I was even thinking this would be called discrete element element set, element kit, or deck, because so these fundamental decks would, and I like that because it's deck of cards, which is another alpha kit, right? You've got a card, you've got a deck of cards, and you can play bridge with it, or you can play all these complex card games with it. It's another example. But so I'm still, I like what you all said last week about some of the language you liked and some of the language you didn't like, and some of the difficulties that are in this, because it's the combination of a two-set thing that's the key here, the elements and the explosive cornucopia. So it's a little bit different from Seth Lloyd's. It looks to me like he's seeing,
yeah, it is different. Yeah,
he's seeing biology and culture being some major phase changes in George's in George's language. So I guess, George, I will submit here, and I know we want to end in a few minutes, is that any of these ontogenic steps are perhaps phase changes, but the phase changes that gave rise to the start of biology and the start of life, start of life and the start of culture, which have brand new alphakit structures in them, I would suggest, are particularly huge phase changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing occurred to me is characterizing it as getting back to the neocortex. The neocortex allows the formation of symbolic representation or symbolic output. So even phonemes are, in a sense, symbolic, because you can actually go to the brain and see the wiring pattern of these different sounds that we make, whether they be musical sounds or what have you. And certainly something like mathematics is quite abstract, but it's also symbolic. So phonemes, tunes,
it would be notes, the note
notes, yeah, notes and so forth are all kinds of elements.
The note is a discrete. Now people want to do half tones and quarter tones. That's a whole complicated thing. But the basic, these bone flutes that they find in the Paleolithic have like 5 holes to them, and people say if you play them, you actually have a pentatonic scale. So you have to picture Paleolithic people playing potentially complex melodies with 5 notes.
Yeah. So you guys may not know it, but Tyler is lead guitar? Did I get that right? Lead guitar in his own band.
Really? You have a YouTube?
Why am I not surprised?
It's called the band is called the Amygdaloids.
Oh, not the Ramones.
Only because the leader who writes most of the songs is Joe Ledoux at my colleague at NYU, and he's done all the work on the amygdala in the brain. And he wrote most of the songs. I wrote a couple songs for each of our CDs.
Oh, you have CDs.
Yeah.
Ah, oh. So if I look at okay.
You have iTunes. If you have any of the streaming services, you can listen to it and hear me play lead guitar. And the basis of the band we're supposed to be sort of science-inspired songs, not to teach science, but there's songs about memory and traces of memory, and songs about I'm trying to think about this right.
What's the name again?
Amygdaloids. I'll
Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Guess what I'm going to be doing this evening.
I came to discover this because Joseph
Amygdaloids.
Ledoux is one of my neurology heroes for his work on that. He wrote a very good book called The Emotional Self. And
The emotional brain.
The Emotional Brain, sorry. And
the second book was The Synaptic Self.
Synaptic Self, right. I was conflating there, but they're both really quite good. Lynn, you should.
I have that. I actually have it.
Oh,
So,
okay, great.
yeah. I have Synaptic Self on my, I haven't read it. I have it on my, Kindle. I can only do, you guys, every time we talk, I have a new list, but I actually have this already on my list. So
I've got a couple more books here, Lynn, if you want.
oh, thanks. No.
You said
Gary's got it.
The Amygdaloids on Spotify. Wow.
Oh, right. Cool.
Mind over matter, fearing, anxious. How free is your will? I just want to forget how. Cool.
So right, those
Okay.
all kind of have laboratory stuff
Yeah.
way in back of them, but it's not trying to be explicit in the song. So sometimes Joe has been, often when he gives neuroscience talks, because he's pretty famous, he'll say, "Can I?" Well, sometimes some of these places would fly the band somewhere to perform too. That was really nice.
Wow.
But most
Wow, that's real.
he might just do a song like on acoustic guitar as part of his lecture, and sort of give a little preview of what in the lab inspired this song, kind of thing. So,
Hey, you know what occurred to me at our conferences, ISSS conferences, we always have entertainment spots. We're bringing in people. Over the years, we've had quite an array. So maybe we could get you and your band to
Sounds great.
if we're in person. We'll see.
musicians in the seven of us here?
I used to be the rhythm guitar in a couple of bands, actually, way back in college days. I haven't touched a guitar probably in 20 years, unfortunately. But yeah, believe it or not, with this voice, I was lead singer and rhythm guitar.
Wow.
Oh,
I play the tin whistle, but more Scottish and Irish music than the. I'll listen to this to see what it sounds like. But I suspect we're in different musical cornucopia sets.
Hillary, what do you play?
The whistle. So the music, mostly Scottish and Irish folk kind of music, traditional dance tunes and such things.
All right, you need to put out a CD and stream on Spotify.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of very, 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 very good.
It's a lot more fun actually to like play live than
Yeah.
Our last gig was scheduled the week that New York City basically shut down. So
Wow.
Yikes. Well, the 2022 conference I'm trying to set up for here in Tacoma at my university.
oh, good.
cool.
So
Cool.
that's travel isn't going to be too terrible.
Cool. Well, Gary, what do you think? We're kind of maybe winding down today. It's been-
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think
I
that
have
was
to go.
a really interesting discussion. Yeah, so
Mm.
again, I think we've made a bit more progress.
Yeah, Tyler, did you feel like,
Yeah.
good stuff is developing?
Yeah, these questions, these elaborations, definitely helping me, and something I'm interested in talking about, obviously. So thank you, thank you all for.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Feel good?
Yeah,
Thank
Good.
you.
See you
I
in a
guess-
month.
See you
I guess
soon.
next time is just like if someone that wants
Hmm.
to say something, just let people know a few days ahead of time. I don't-
Yeah.
Things are going to be evolving this month for me, so it'll be interesting because I've got two things going, and stuff always comes out of that,
yeah.
And I'm going to have to write a section in this book. God help me, Where do I start? So you guys have to put it together, thank you, in the next 6 months.
Gary, I'm interested in what you were talking about at the beginning. I don't guarantee I can
Okay. Well, if you're interested,
engage
I
or
can
not.
spend 10 minutes going through that next time. Yeah.
Okay.
I second that.
Okay.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks, then.
Okay,
right.
thanks
See you
everyone.
next time. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice month.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.